College football nerds here doing a little Iron Bowl recap. Yes, this game was a large margin, and we don't usually do recaps for large margins, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in this game about Alabama. We want to have a commentary on Gus Malzahn as well. So it's our show, Josh, and we can talk about what we want to talk about. We're talking about the Iron Bowl again. Okay, so starting off in this game, and I want to get this out there because we got killed by some Alabama fans, some really sensitive Alabama fans on Twitter, because I made the comment that basically Mac Jones in the first quarter was pressing, and he wasn't doing the things that made him Mac Jones up into this point this season. And this is objectively true, and I don't know why people got so upset. And I wasn't saying Mac Jones sucks and he's going to suck the rest of the game. I said he was pressing in this game. And the main thing that he was doing wrong, or that he wasn't showing that had been so good all year, was pocket breaks down a little bit, footwork to climb the pocket, buys him enough time. We saw this all the way back in the Michigan game. Buys him enough time to find an open guy and make a good throw. And that's a read situation combined with footwork. He wasn't doing that, and it was causing a couple of things. It was making him jump throws early, misreads that took a little while to come open. A good example of this, you were talking about it before we started airing this. 3rd and 15 on the 39-yard line for Auburn, first possession. First down, he threw an ill-advised pass. 3rd down, he threw a shot in a double coverage to Bolden when he had protection, but he felt that the protection was breaking down, even though it wasn't. And just another tick later, Devonta Smith is running free, wide open for 20 yards. Would have got a first down. He threw a couple of worm burners on, I think, the next or the third possession. He missed Mechie. I think he ended up getting a first down on like a check down, but he missed Mechie for a wide open touchdown. I mean, it was as open as the one he threw to Devonta Smith. And yes, he had 100 yards in the first quarter. 66 of that came on one throw. That was wide open. I'm not killing Mac Jones. He played a great game, but we got a lot of heat last week after we said the offense wasn't clicking quite like we thought it had been against Kentucky. Even Mac Jones came out after we said that, because he watches the show and he knows, and he wanted to own it. He said he hadn't been playing as well in the Kentucky game. He didn't play as well as he had been all season. All of that to say, he ended up being a dude after that. Sark slowed it down for him a little bit, gave him one read situations. The deep fade to the right side of the end zone was a thing of beauty. We had Bo Nix kind of throwing a little shade, implying that he's a game manager, and that's where Josh is going to come in and talk about why, even if Bo Nix was throwing shade, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Going to talk about Tua and Jones and all of that stuff. I just wanted to get that out of the way. So, Josh, get us into this game management concept or discussion from Nix and into how that makes up who Mac Jones is.
The reason Alabama's offense early in the season, and I don't know that it's quite as true without Waddle, but with Waddle was so good, is how well Mac Jones was managing the game. And we said the first few weeks in, we really felt like Alabama's offense was better this year than it was the past 2 years. When things aren't open downfield, Mac Jones has done a very good job of finding a tight end or a back, getting rid of the ball, and letting somebody make yards. It's the same thing Burrow did last year. And it's really the thing that differentiated Burrow from Tua, for example, in that LSU game. Tua can make throws that Mac Jones and Joe Burrow can't. And I'm not saying Mac Jones is necessarily Joe Burrow, but the thing that made Joe Burrow so effective was his ability to realize, you know what, I don't have anything. Here you go, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, make a play. And, Edwards-Helaire runs over Trevon Diggs for a first down. You've got to trust your guys to do that. And if you just give them the opportunity, they'll make plays that you don't think are necessarily going to happen otherwise. Mac Jones, like he was talking about with the Bolden example, by forcing these balls downfield, was depriving himself of the opportunity to get easy yardage. He was depriving himself of the opportunity to move the sticks. And early in the season, because he was checking it down and because they're so talented across the board, Alabama rarely ended up in a situation where it was 3rd and long. And if you got to 3rd down, it was 3rd and short, and they converted easily because there were way too many weapons. Now they're missing on some of those shots. They're pressing a little bit, and the lack of Waddle means they don't quite get as many explosive plays when they do throw a little short thing. So I think the game manager label, it's not a bad title. I mean, that just means that Mac Jones does that stuff right. But Mac Jones, when he's on his game, is also one of the best deep ball throwers I've seen. Talk about the fade. He consistently lays it in there, and it's one of the prettiest tight, deep balls. You combine the two, the ability to manage things effectively and the ability to make a good read and be a very accurate downfield passer, and it's devastating because teams have to contend with Alabama's efficiency, play in and play out. And when they do get a guy open, and Alabama gets guys open because the receivers are really good, Jones hits it. Now, let me transition into a little bit of another topic here, and I kind of want to hear your thoughts on this. Bo Nix made these game manager comments, but I really have two thoughts of that with Nix, his play in this game, and what it means for him. I felt like Bo Nix really wasn't that bad in this game. I mean, his stat line's bad, 23 of 38, but 6 yards per attempt, 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. The thing was, Nix, a lot of times, scrambling and extending plays was the only reason that their offense was working. And Nix's ability to improvise kind of kept things going a lot. I think the irony, and this is why I wanted to bring it up now, is Nix was a really poor game manager. He did get the ball out early on time a lot. When he did, he was pretty effective. But, in terms of highlight plays and in terms of individual effort and extending drives, particularly with his athleticism, which I think, honestly, Nix could be a player at a different position very easily. He's athletic enough to be a high-level tight end or even maybe a running back at a lower-level school. He is that athletic. I think that kept Auburn in the game, where at the same time, their lack of offensive effectiveness and efficiency kept them out of it.
Yeah, and if Seth Williams could catch, I know that's a joke because he's a great receiver, but in one play, he couldn't catch the ball, and it was perfectly thrown. But you make a good point. I mean, look, the Malachi Moore interception was a great play from Moore, combined with the fact that the ball wasn't thrown out of the break. Like, if he throws that ball right at or before the break, instead of the break and then kind of hoping he gets open and then letting it go, like, there was enough separation there, because there always is, that if the timing was right, that's not an interception and it's a first down. And so that's kind of what I see there is it's little things from him where, and this is what's so frustrating about him. He's kind of, we always draw this comparison, like every time there's a mercurial quarterback, it's Kellen Mond. He reminds me a lot of Kellen Mond, where he will make a crazy good throw, and then he'll miss a dump off on 3rd and 3 and kill a drive. And that's what's so weird to me about him, in that Jimbo Fisher does this a lot with Kellen Mond, and I think that we've seen this with Bo Nix as well. Against teams where they should be running the quarterback more, they don't. Against Alabama, the way they were playing, they were doing a little bit of zone in this game, and they were exposing themselves a little bit to a running quarterback situation where, and I think one of the few early 3rd down conversions came from Bo running the ball. I was surprised that I didn't see more design runs as part of and component of this offense, and I think that was a failure by the offensive staff, especially knowing that you didn't have a running back that was good to go. Your best running back and your tackles, were out or at 50%. You got to be good to go. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about expectations in this game and have you sort of discuss relative to the model, because on one hand, there was a lot of jubilation from Alabama fans that they dump trucked Auburn, and we're hearing about how Alabama is really improving. And I do think they're much improved from, say, the Ole Miss game. But on the other hand, kind of like we told Oklahoma fans to pump the brakes on their offense when they steamrolled a terrible Kansas and terrible Texas Tech defense, is there some of that here where we might be taking too much about Alabama from this win over Auburn in that Auburn just isn't the team that they should be?
I think that may be the case. So our model in this game was pretty accurate. It had it 47-18. That's a 29-point spread. The final score obviously was a 29-point spread. We were 5 points off on the total with the model, but that's not half bad, right? 42-13 versus 47-18. I'll take that every day. And the expectations, I think, for yardage were really close. Alabama was expected to get 10.5 yards per attempt. They got 11.6. Auburn was expected to get 6.4 yards per attempt. They got 6. So really across the board, particularly in the passing game, the model had it pegged. Where I want to note, though, is the model was saying going into this game, based off how they played to this point, this was what the B-plus game for each team should look like. And this is the brutal truth, especially for Auburn fans. This game wasn't a shocking dominant performance. This was who Auburn was, and this was who Alabama was. And this is why we thought Alabama was going to win the game by a large margin in our prediction video. Both of us saw the fact that Auburn, they're a solid enough team. Alabama's on a whole other level. And a lot of people nationally, I think they were sort of surprised because they knew like last year's Auburn result, and maybe there's an expectation of a letdown. Look, we've been over it 100 million times, and maybe we can put it to rest finally because this game's been played. Alabama in the Auburn game last year was a shell of their former selves. We were split on who was going to win the game last year because we knew their run defense had collapsed. The reality is, when healthy, Alabama is much better than Auburn. And the reality this year is, let's be blunt, Ole Miss, Arkansas, South Carolina, they could have easily lost all 3 of those games and arguably should have lost all 3 of those games. But moreover, I think the reality is that Auburn is pretty much on par with those 3 teams. I mean, despite whatever the talent level may or may not be, Auburn was 2-1 against teams of their tier with those other games. And I think the reality for Auburn this year is they had kind of gotten lucky in that they hadn't played Alabama yet, and they don't have to play Florida. They got destroyed by Georgia. They haven't yet played A&M. The A&M game will be interesting, and I think Daniel may have some thoughts on that. But if Auburn loses to A&M, at that point, you're looking at a 4-loss Auburn who just kind of ends up being the top of the very squishy middle of the pack in the SEC West.
And I think you said, and basically the model is saying that this game represented a much better Alabama team from last year and a maybe declining Auburn team compared to last year. And Auburn wasn't great last year, which brings us to an organic segue to talk about Gus Malzahn. And I'm so torn on this because I think that Gus should be gone because I think coach fatigue is real. I think that the same thing happened with Tommy Tuberville at Auburn, where his tenure there had just run its course. And it was getting to the point where the program was stagnating, even though he wasn't a worse coach than when he started. The program was stagnating, and it was ultimately affecting recruiting, and I think we're seeing that with Auburn as well now. There's no excitement around the program, and even in a year where they beat Alabama, ironically, the last 2 times they beat Alabama, they really couldn't capitalize on it because last year, I think everybody kind of knew that wasn't the Alabama that started the season, and then they went and lost to Minnesota, and then in 2017, they beat Alabama, but Alabama won the national championship. Look, I think Gus Malzahn is a good coach, and I think that it's telling that in his tenure, he's beaten Alabama as many times as the entire rest of the SEC has beaten Alabama. That is absolutely telling. And so for all the people that want to trash Gus and for all of the Auburn fans that are ready to get rid of him, And I'm not one of those guys that's like, who are you going to get that's better? Because there's always potentially someone better. That does not to say that there's not somebody out there for Auburn that could be better. And I do think in some ways a lot of people could be better because it would inject life into that program, especially with recruiting. But I want to say this. Look, he has held his own against Alabama, which is the first thing you got to do at Auburn. He has held his own against Alabama better than I think anybody else would have done, or at least as well as anybody else would have done that you would put in his shoes. I mean, Kirby hadn't beaten Saban yet, and none of his other disciples have beaten him yet, and so I think that's worth noting. You've got some other thoughts because we discussed this before we hit play, so I'm gonna let you give me a counterpoint on Gus Malzahn.
As normal, Daniel forces me to be the Grim Reaper. My counterpoint with Gus Malzahn would be, yeah, he beats Alabama, but he doesn't beat a lot of the other guys he should beat. The reality for Auburn is they run a weird, gimmicky kind of offense that's, we talk about it a lot. It's based off power run inside and then complementing that with the sweeps so the linebackers, when they're chasing inside, can't keep the edge. And then when the safeties come down to defend the edges, you go over the top. It's a very 1-2-3 kind of offense, just conceptually. When teams were not running the hurry up, no huddle, when teams weren't used to playing the spread every week, it was really novel and it was really effective. Now that teams have adjusted and teams are smaller, faster, they're used to playing the spread, they probably run the spread themselves, they're used to running hurry up, no huddle, a lot of the advantages have gone away, and Auburn's offense is only effective when it's really dominant running the ball. And when it does that, it has some good counters, but that's a lot to ask. And the other problem is, if that's not working, Auburn doesn't have traditional prototype receivers. They don't have traditional prototype tight ends. I mean, this year, looking at their roster, yeah, Schwartz is the fastest guy in football, and Eli Stove is a really fast player. They're not, like 6'3", 220-pound NFL prototype receivers. They're just not. They got one of those in Seth Williams, and it's why they lean on him to an absurd degree in most of these games, because the other guys can't necessarily be asked to run the full route tree. They're good players, but they're put in weird situations, and they're often square pegs trying to fit into a round hole. You look at J.J. McGee's. One of the biggest tenets to Auburn's offense is a lot of multiplicity. They run a lot of formations with the same personnel, and they love having tight ends that are big enough to be dominant blockers, because they'll sometimes split them out and throw them to them, but then they'll move them inside, and it's really the move inside that gets you, because you go nickel to try to defend the pass, and then they go into a heavy set and they smash you in the face with their tight end. Uzomah was crucial for them and a way underappreciated piece of that 2013 team because of how physical he was as a blocker, and they would motion him inside, and it was really that blocking part of his game that made him effective for Auburn. Pegues is an attempt at that, but he's, again, kind of a square peg, round hole. He's way too big to run downfield routes, and he can make some plays in the passing game when he's uncovered, but he can't get separation. And that's the reality for Auburn, I think, is lots of odd pieces and pieces that are well equipped to sort of strain a defense like Alabama that's very conceptually difficult. And because of that and all their complexity, they sometimes screw up assignments. And the Seth Williams should have been touchdowns an example. I mean, they give up busted plays, and that works for Auburn. But when they play Arkansas with Barry Odom, and Arkansas just sat back on defense, they had no answer. There's no consistent, regular routine offensive scheme that works. And you end up seeing Bo Nix running around like a chicken with his head cut off, trying to make plays that aren't there in a really unfair manner. So to me, that's the biggest problem with Auburn. That's the biggest problem with their scheme, is it's just outdated. And I will say this. People rag on Malzahn, but first, I don't know how many coaches I like better than Malzahn in the SEC, even today. I mean, as much as he's had his struggles, right now, I mean, maybe Fisher, given the way they're playing this year, but that's pretty arguable. I mean, are you going to take Ed Orgeron? Are you going to take Pittman in Arkansas? Maybe. That's early. I mean, sure, you take Mullen. Okay, well, we'll take the division leaders in each division. Maybe you take Kirby Smart, but even that one is skeptical, right? There just aren't many great coaches. But I do think, like you said, with coaching fatigue, given the way the scheme is, and most importantly to me, given their failure to adapt and to evolve in an offense, and the way that Alabama has now become a much more dynamic, inventive spread team than Auburn is, and yeah, I said it, I think that's why Malzahn has to go, because they're just not making improvement in the way they need to be, and they're about 2 to 3 years out from being really behind and really starting to fall off as a program.
Yeah, and I think offensively, that's why he's got to go. They're not recruiting to any real standard scheme. He can't recruit offensive linemen to save his life. He can't really recruit wide receivers to save his life. He's had some decent quarterbacks come through there. Not great at developing a quarterback. In Gus's defense, and this is why you probably like him, it's the reason why I think he's a pretty good coach too. His teams play well coached. They're fundamentally sound. He always has good special teams, which I think is a very telling mark of a good coach, even though Nick Saban can't get a kicker, although he's got one this year. So for me, I think that's something that is a little bit in his favor that's maybe not so obvious. He's done well with defense, with bringing Muschamp in and with Steele now. I just don't think, like, it's been too many times of like, okay, I'm out of the offense. I'm bringing in Chad Morris. I'm bringing in somebody else. Like, and you go back the last, 3 years, it's been he's falling on the sword to save his job by bringing in another guy, but it still looks like the same Auburn offense. And that has some concern to me where, like, when we saw Gaddis go to Michigan, we said Harbaugh brought Gaddis in because he's never called plays. He's a wide receiver coach. He's kind of a figurehead OC, and this way Harbaugh can still have his hand in the cookie jar. I think Gus still has his hand in the cookie jar, and I think it's ultimately going to cost him at Auburn, and maybe it's just time. Anything else on the Iron Bowl before we wrap this one up?
The one thing I'll add is the same thing we're dealing with Nebraska fans. I thought it was kind of funny. You got hit on Twitter about how they should have never let Pelini go because you had 9-win seasons. And that didn't deal with the reality of what they were going to look like afterwards. I think there's a real chance that whoever replaces Malzahn is actually less successful on average than Malzahn. But I think the reality is if Malzahn stays, he's going to be less successful than he has to this point. And I think it's the latter point that people don't pick up on. I think it's silly for people to defend coaches that make several $1 million a year. They don't need your love and support. They have a golden parachute. And when a guy is starting to bring your program downhill, you have to make a change. Even if you don't maintain the same consistency as Auburn, you've got to roll the dice, keep things fresh, and give yourself the ability to maintain your momentum as a program and having a chance to improve.
So I think for me, really, the final takeaway is kind of what you said. These teams are who we thought they are, but in Alabama, it is a really good team. I hate that we didn't get to see an Auburn with their 2 tackles and Bigsby healthy to see that if Alabama could still put up I say 6 points, that last touchdown was really garbage time. And if it wasn't for player safety concerns and rules about hitting quarterbacks, Nix would have been demolished in the other end zone and it would have been the safety. That's another topic for a different day. I did talk about it on Twitter. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for hanging with us for this long recap. Have a great week and God bless.